Good morning. So this is part 2 of our discussion over suffering. Last time I gave a little introduction on it and told you that the Bible has a lot to say about suffering, that God dedicated a good portion of His Word to preparing us for suffering and encouraging us in it and through it and giving us hope in it and through it. So today we're going to, this being part 2, we are going to today start talking about why we suffer. That may help us a little bit to understand our suffering better and to be able to see where it comes from. So, number 1, I suffer because I live in a fallen, broken world. I don't know if you've noticed that, but this world is broken. The people that live in this world are broken. And sometimes we suffer by absolutely no fault of our own. It is simply because of this world and the people that live in it that may do something to us that cause us to suffer. The Bible gives us a great example of Joseph. I love the story of Joseph. And one thing about him was that he wasn't perfect by any means. If you read through his story and you think, well, he really, to be able to go through all that he went through and be able to always turn to God. But he started out as this bratty teenager who was throwing in the face into his brother's faces and his parents' faces of these dreams that he would have, that one day they would all bow down to him. And so he was a bit of a brat. Now, I don't know really that being a bratty teenager rises to the level of that you should be sold into slavery. There could be some siblings out there that would disagree with me, but it really doesn't rise to that level. But that is what happened to him through his brothers, who had had enough and sold him into slavery. But then in Genesis chapter 50, verse 2, Joseph tells those brothers who sold him into slavery, "What you intended for evil, God planned for good." And that good that God did in him was that he created this leader out of that bratty teenager who would lead a nation through a famine. And through him, through Joseph, God saved a lot of people from starvation, in particularly his very own family, the covenant family of God. So we suffer because we live in a fallen, broken world, and sometimes it's just not even our fault. It's just the way things are. Another reason that we suffer, and I'm sorry to say, but I suffer because I sin. Galatians 6:7 says, "Don't be deceived. God will not be mocked. For whatever a man sows, he will also reap." There are consequences for my sin. There's consequences for your sin. And when I have to sit in those consequences, that disobedience, that rebellion that I have committed, it's painful. But God doesn't want to leave us in those places. He is always at work, bringing those things to light, bringing my sin, my rebellion to light, that I may want to keep hidden. I may want to just keep it to myself. And maybe it's something that I just don't want to let go of. But he loves us too much to leave us where we are, sitting in that muck and that yuck. There is no freedom in that. There is no peace. There is no joy. But there is suffering. But there is someone who would tell you that you can find freedom and you can find peace and joy in following your own rebellious heart. And that is your enemy, our enemy. 1 Peter 5, verses 8 and 9 tell us to be serious. It even uses an exclamation mark there. Be alert. Another exclamation mark. You know, I know when we text, I'm bad about this. We text and we just throw those exclamation marks out there all over the place. But the Bible doesn't overuse exclamation marks. So when it does, maybe we should pay very close attention. Be serious. Be alert. Your adversary, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion, looking for anyone he can devour. My enemy wants to devour me. Think about that word, devour. I mean, it's not stumble or trip up. Devour. I mean, let's be honest. We're pretty good at stumbling and tripping ourselves up. We can do that all on our own. We cannot blame everything that we do wrong on the devil. But we would be very foolish to not heed Peter's warning to be serious and be alert. One more reason that I suffer that we'll talk about today is because Jesus suffered. The message that Jesus brought into the world did and does still today elicit some very strong feelings. Being a follower of Jesus subjects you and me to ridicule at the very least and persecution at the most. We in this country, being a Christian is not the most popular thing anymore. Growing up, most of you, we can think about, we remember that time and it was like everybody we knew was a Christian, or everybody at least followed biblical guidelines because that's what our society was built on. That's not necessarily the case right now. And we can definitely look throughout the world and see places where Christians are being persecuted to death for believing in Jesus. John 15:18 records Jesus saying that if the world hates you, understand that it hated me before it hated you. Philippians 3:10, Paul says, my goal is to know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his suffering. Have you ever thought about that? When we suffer for Jesus, with Jesus, we are in fellowship with him. Now, it's not the kind of fellowship we as Baptists like to think about, where ice cream fellowship or, having a potluck of some sort, or definitely where casseroles might be involved. This is a different kind of fellowship. But we are promised that that same power that raised Jesus from the dead will help us to endure the suffering that will be put upon us in this world, because the world hates us, because it hates Jesus too. So Paul, to go that far to say that his goal is to have that fellowship of suffering, because he knows that through that he will also get to experience the power that raised Jesus from the dead. So those are a few things that we covered today in the fact that we will suffer, and why we will suffer: because this world is broken and fallen. We will suffer because we sin, and we will suffer because we have an enemy, and we also suffer because Jesus suffered, and we are his people. Next time, we'll talk about one more other reason before we suffer, before we get to the good news of what God does for us, in us, and through us in our suffering. So I'll see you next time. Bye.